Logic as
No,
absolute?
I'm asking you, is logic absolute?
Define logic. Because are you talking about the logical absolutes that we talked about, the laws of identity, non-contradiction?
Yes. Are they absolute?
I believe that they're absolute.
So, are they absolute? That's my question.
Are you asking me if I'm absolutely certain that they're absolute?
I'm asking you if they're absolute.
You're asking me if they're absolute.
Right.
I don't know.
So, do they necessarily apply to this debate?
Yes.
Based on what standard?
I believe that they apply to this debate.
They necessarily, or do you believe it, or do they necessarily apply to this debate?
Well, I can't, since I can't say for absolute certain that they're there, or that.
Does this debate have to follow absolute laws of logic? No. It doesn't? No. For reasons the Bible. Remember that, folks. Remember that, folks. This debate doesn't have to follow logic. That's going to come.
Well, since logic doesn't always hold, ice cream has bones, the purple penguin says much, therefore God exists. That's my answer.
No one else? Since this answer doesn't have to be logical, no, I'm not going to. But you understand what it's like if you deny logic. See, the thing is, I'm not going to live up to their worldview and deny logic. I'm going to assume that our world is true and give a logical answer. But if I were to be consistent with their worldview, I wouldn't have to.
Okay, you made the claim it may just be logic just exists. Correct?
Oh, yes.
So if we were to say from the Christian perspective, God just exists, would you accept that as an atheist?
I wouldn't accept it, no.
Yes. You said logic may not be absolute. Is it true?
It's possible, yes.
So it's not possible.
No, it's possible.
So it is not possible.
Possibility is not rendered by absolutism.
So possibility is rendered by absolutism.
Possibility is not rendered by absolutism.
It is.
No, just because you have contradictions does not mean that you have to abide by.
So you don't actually believe your claim.
No, I do believe my claim. I gave you plenty of evidence why that claim is perfectly
You mentioned
feasible.
quickly that laws of logic are just conventional.
Yes.
Okay, so if society determines different laws of logic where you can contradict yourself, that would be appropriate for you?
I'm sorry, say again?
If a society determines by convention that it's perfectly okay and acceptable to contradict yourself, would you accept that?
If logic is a convention, that's entirely possible, yes.
So it's possible for society to say illogical things and contradictions, and that's acceptable by convention.
It would be relative to the community defining what the logical convention is.
So logic can change over time.
Logic can change, yes, over time. And
Thank you.
I heard you mention logical binds and logical self-contradictions in your speech. You did say that?
I said it. I used that phrase, yes.
Do you believe there are laws of logic then?
Absolutely.
Are they universal?
They're agreed upon by human beings. They aren't laws that exist out in nature.
Are they simply conventions then?
They're conventions, but they're conventions that are self-verifying.
Are they sociological laws or laws of thought?
They are laws of thought which are interpreted by men and promulgated by men.
Are they material in nature?
How can a law be material?
That's the question I'm going to ask you. Thank you.
I would say no.
At this time, you have an opportunity to cross-examine Dr. Bonson.
Dr. Bonson, would you call God material or immaterial?
Immaterial.
What is something that's immaterial?
Something not extended in space.
Can you give me an example of anything other than God that's immaterial?
Laws of logic.
Can I ask that you hold that down?
Why should he feed the poor? He says they want to do that. I grant that. My argument tonight has never been that atheists are the lousiest people in the world. That's not the point. Some Christians can be pretty lousy too. But why is it that I call atheists or Christians lousy when they act in the ways that we're thinking of? Because I have absolute standards of morality to judge. Dr. Stein does not. And therefore, once again, from a transcendental standpoint, the atheistic worldview cannot account for this debate tonight. Because this debate tonight has assumed that we're going to use the laws of logic as standards of reasoning, or else we're irrational. But we're going to use laws of science. We're going to be intelligent men that way. We're going to assume induction and causation and all those things that scientists do, and it's assumed moral sense. And we're not going to be dishonest and try to lie or just try to deceive you. I mean, if there aren't laws of morality, I could just take out a gun right now and say, okay, Dr. Stein, make my day. Is there a God or not? You see, if he argues, oh no, you can't murder me because there are laws of morality, then of course he's made my day because I won the debate. That shows that the atheist universe is not correct. But if he says, oh no, there are no absolute standards, it's all by convention and stipulation, that sort of thing, then I just pull the trigger and it's all over and I win the debate anyway. Would you expect me to win the debate in that fashion? Absolutely not. You came here expecting rational interchange. I don't think we've heard much from Dr. Stein. I've asked him repeatedly, it's very simple, I don't want a lot of details, just begin to scratch the surface. How, in a materialistic, naturalistic outlook on life, man in his place in the world, can you account for laws of logic, laws of science, and laws of morality? The atheist worldview cannot do it, and therefore I feel justified in concluding, as I did my opening presentation this evening, by saying that the proof of the Christian God is the impossibility of the contrary. Without the Christian worldview, this debate wouldn't make sense.
Laws of logic. The unbeliever says that there is only, the atheist, only the material, nothing spiritual, nothing immaterial. And yet they appeal to laws of logic. But again, like laws of math, laws of logic are universal, they are unchanging, they are necessary for our human experience. And the unbeliever wants them, but they cannot justify them. You know what the atheist wants at all points? They just want to gimme. Just give me that. Just give me logic so I can argue against God. Just give me science so I can live. Just give me ethics for my children. Just give me it. I just want to have that so I can argue against God. What we need to do as Christians is point to people and say, you can't even have that without Jesus Christ. You can't have science without Jesus Christ. You can't have logic. You can't have ethics. And here's a good point. Laws of logic. You've been depending upon Him the whole time. You're doing it right now. As I'm speaking, you're going, are there any holes in what He's saying? Are there any inconsistencies? And if I had them, you'd point them out, and rightfully so. Because as Christians, when we stand on God's revelation, we know our thoughts are to be a reflection of the way God thinks. That God cannot lie. To lie is to engage in contradiction. To lie is to contradict what is actually true. The basis, I mean, this can be expanded upon, the basis of laws of logic is the very character and mind of God. Unchanging, universal, immaterial. And as Christians, we have a basis for laws of logic. But the unbeliever, ready, who believes that he's matter in motion or she's matter in motion, they have no justification for immaterial, universal laws of thought. So when the atheist says to you, Christianity is so illogical, you know what your first answer should be? Well, I reject that, but so what? You're an atheist, right? They say, well, yeah. Well, then laws of logic aren't necessary. They aren't universal. They aren't unchanging. Why are you chastising me? My grandpappy was a fish. Is it wrong to be inconsistent and illogical? And the unbeliever goes, well, no, it's not absolute. Okay, well, to the Christian, come. It's got a purple. Wood. And the sky is hello. Mother said, what? What? And ice cream under the bridge and cars. And zoom. And the unbeliever goes, wait, you're not making any sense. Oh, but I am making sense. And a great example is I had this atheist come into chapel one day at the hospital. And I used to put signs up all over the hospital every day. And I'd say, come and refute the Christian pastor. And I would invite people to just come in and argue with me. It was grand because these people were like on detoxification medicine, high as a kite, and they would just come in to like argue with the pastor. And it was just great. Rooms were full every single night. So this atheist comes in and he's challenging me, and I invited it, and I just wanted to love these people, and so many people came to Christ through it. It's amazing. That's how Apologia Church was formed, by the way, out of that hospital. So praise God for that. But this atheist, militant atheist comes in, he's challenging me, and so I brought up laws of logic. I said, well, laws of logic. I said, you're a materialist, you're an atheist, there's no God, there's no meaning, no order, nothing immaterial. He goes, right. I said, okay, are laws of logic absolutely necessary? And he knew what I was doing. And he was like, no. I said, okay, they are. He goes, no. I go, okay, great, thank you, they are. He goes, no. I said, good, okay, yes. And he goes, no. I said, so yes. And he goes, no. And now everybody's face is red. They're like just trying to hold it in. He's getting furious now. He's like, no. And I said, okay, so yes. He goes, why are you doing this? I said, why am I not doing this? And he kept going, and I was contradicting him. And I said, is it bothering you that I'm contradicting you? He says, yes. I said, no. I said, you see the point? I said, you said that laws of logic are not necessary, not universal, not absolute, because you're trying to be a consistent atheist. But the moment I start contradicting you and engaging in logical contradiction, you won't have it. Why? Because you're made in the image of God. You know the God that I'm talking about. Your problem is sin. And though you try to construct a very sophisticated worldview, you can't get around the image of God that you are. And the unbeliever, all they have is brain gas. The thoughts that are happening in their mind is the result of chemical processes simply firing away in their head. In that case, they're not even really thinking, they're fizzing. And you happen to be fizzing like a Christian, and they're fizzing like an atheist. So what? That's all they have. I talked to this atheist in our debate. He's a materialist. I said, are laws of logic material or immaterial in nature? Are they made of matter? And he goes, immaterial. I said, okay, can you put one in my hand, please? He goes, oh, Jeff, I hate when you do this. He said, no, it's happening in my brain. I said, okay, so can I cut out the law of logic? And he goes, no, it's the result of chemical processes. And if it's the result of chemical processes, listen, it's not a law, it's not universal, and I'm not required to obey it. Because what's happening in your brain is different than what's happening in my brain. And if all you have is brain gas, you don't have laws, you just simply have chemical processes. That's all the unbeliever has. That's an internal critique of their system. And it's not a matter of just a sophisticated argument. You could say it as simply as this: so what? You're an atheist. You live in a universe that doesn't care. There's no justice ahead of any of us. That's all you've got. And the reason you construct this system and yet behave like a Christian is because you know the God that I'm talking about. And you need Jesus Christ. He's your only hope. You need to turn from your sin. This is who Jesus is. He's God who came to rescue rebels. He took on flesh, died for sinners, and rose from the dead. Your only hope is turning to Him in faith.
So what about logic? Tonight our opponents will make logical objections to the truth of Christianity. They might say, look at all the logical contradictions in the Bible. I'm sure you've all heard that before. But what are they assuming when they make that objection? They're assuming that there are universal, immaterial, unchanging laws of logic that forbid contradictions. Of course, I believe that there aren't any contradictions in the Bible, and as a Christian, I'll seek to resolve anything that looks contradictory. But how does the atheist account for the universal, immaterial, unchanging law of non-contradiction in a random chance world made only of matter? Christians believe in a God who is universal, who is not made of matter, and who does not change. Logical laws make sense in our worldview. When our opponent makes logical objections to Christianity, they're borrowing the foundation of logic from Christianity and are actually proving that God exists.
Okay.
So how do you know your senses and your reason are valid?
How do I know? Because it's all I have. It's all I have.
Yeah, so this is what the Christian worldview says, is that apart from a transcendent lawgiver God, apart from God who interprets reality for us and tells us who we are, who He is, and what the world is around us, we don't have a source of transcendent certainty. And so the only thing you have, my friend, is to say, I trust my reason because of my reason. But you see, that is a viciously circular argument for a person that does not know everything.
What do you believe is the primary cause of human suffering?
So what I'm saying is that you've just, in your worldview, it causes you to surrender knowledge, where you can't have the certainty of anything.
What do you believe is the primary cause of human suffering?
Would you acknowledge, though, that if I give you an answer, does it have to be intelligible? Because for a person that doesn't know anything for certain, what good is my answer? Unless you have a correct basis for interpreting knowledge, what good is a knowledge claim? But here's the problem, my friend. You do know things, but it's not because of the way you interpret the world. It's because of the way that God interpreted the world for us. You know things only because God made you in His image. He made you in His likeness. He gave you the capacity to reason, to feel, to sense. He gave you the ability to know things for certain. And that is why we can have this conversation. Not because of your worldview, because of mine. You see, your worldview doesn't give us the precondition for this discussion, but my worldview does. I would really encourage you to think about that. That is really what, as a Christian, how I argue for the Christian faith. I don't say, hey, look at this rock. We found an ancient manuscript, or we found an ancient burial that had this stone. And look, eventually I'm going to pile up the evidence as high as I can, and hopefully you can say, oh, you know what, there's a really, really good chance maybe Christianity might be true. No, I argue the complete opposite. I say without Christianity, you can't interpret this discussion.
But the problem is that...
And I know that's a different way of looking at it. It comes from a much more philosophical point of view, and I think it's more theological. It's what the Bible teaches, that in Jesus Christ are hidden all of the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Without God, we don't have laws of logic. Do you believe in the laws of logic?
I believe... Yes, I believe that logic exists.
So where do the laws come from?
Why does it have to be some supreme being that exists outside of space and time?
Well, more fundamentally, my question was, if you see, I can explain these things as a Christian, but for you, where do the laws of logic come from, if they are indeed laws?
I don't know. Why? I feel like that's missing the point.
It's not missing the point because I'm pointing out that you cannot account for your own worldview. You cannot account why we're logical beings.
So because of that, God exists?
No.
That one proof?
Because of the impossibility of the contrary, God exists. Because it is not possible to reason. In other words, my argument is very simple. Atheism presupposes theism. That's my argument. And the argument is very similar to the way that logicians have argued in the past. How do you know the law of non-contradiction is valid? How do you know the law of non-contradiction is true? Without a doubt.
I don't know what that means. That doesn't mean anything to me. I don't
maybe you should listen and I'll tell you.
I have been listening.
Listen to this. Okay, he's doing Aristotle did this. He said, how do you know the law of non-contradiction is valid? Absolutely know for certain. He said, try to deny it. So the moment you try to say the law of non-contradiction is not valid, you assert it by trying to deny it. And I'm saying the same thing with God. The minute you try and make an argument for the non-existence of God, you use His God-given laws to do it, thus presupposing the God of the Bible. That's the only God that I'm concerned with arguing here for today. I'm not here arguing for a generic God. Hey, there's a big guy in the sky somewhere. We're going to find out who he is. No, I am here arguing for the Christian worldview as a whole. As a whole. You understand? I know it's frustrating, but the only thing I was trying to show this young man is when you come up here with truth claims, knowledge claims, even disagreements, but then you don't have a basis for knowledge or truth claims, your truth claims are not valid, at least not in your worldview. So then you have to either surrender your worldview, you have to rethink your claims, or you have to adopt a different worldview that can account for the type of claims that you're making. That's why I'm a Christian. Because when Jesus died on the cross, it says He died to redeem our thinking. Because without God, our thinking is futile. It is darkened. We say things like, I reason because I reason. My senses are valid because I sense that my senses are valid. Those type of viciously circular arguments is exactly the frustration that the Bible is talking about. It actually says that teaches that you will stand in contradiction to yourself. You oppose yourself. And that's what it means to deny God, is to oppose yourself. That's why the Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you want wisdom and knowledge, you must first begin with a proper relationship between God and his creature, between creator and creature. Apart from that, you won't have a worldview that makes any sense. I've been here for 6 years, and that's been the case over and over and over. The only other option is to say, well, I'm going to believe in a different religion than yours. Okay, like Islam. And like I've proven, the same issue applies for Muslims. If you take the Bible away from the Quran falls to the ground as an unintelligible book that makes no sense to anybody, unless you're a Christian. Because the Quran talks about Abraham, the Quran talks about Moses and Miriam and Jesus and Judas, and it talks about the apostles, and it talks about the prophets. But if you don't have a Christian background, you wouldn't know who they're even talking about. So without the Bible, the Quran is meaningless. I would say the same thing about every other worldview. Without the biblical worldview, you cannot account for your own worldview. Did you have another comment or question?
Yes, sir. You said you are out here to evangelize, right? To get people to follow you in the same way that you're following, correct?
I'm here to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in the hopes and in the certainty that God will use his word to convert the hearts of man to love him, obey him, and fellowship with him forever.
So evangelize, correct? So if you just said you were trying to evangelize people and you want to get them to follow the same way as you are, you said to the other guy who was speaking, if he doesn't believe, he can't have the correct conversation with you to be able to understand what you're talking about, correct?
Not according to his worldview.
But you said, since he does not follow Christ, he does not know the same things that you do, which means he cannot understand, have the same conversation that you're having.
If you listen carefully, I specifically. Okay. Well, I would say you didn't listen carefully enough, because I told him.
I didn't listen careful enough in class either, but
right.
I'm doing all right there too.
Man, your grades will reflect that. But
I'm pretty good.
I tell him, look, I said, you do know things. Didn't you hear me say that?
I did hear that.
Thank you.
But there are different things than what
he does know things, but not because of his worldview, because of mine. Because he's made in the image of God as a rational, salient creature. That's why.
But if he was going to have a civilized, correct conversation about the gospel with you, you said it was very hard for him to have that conversation because he did not believe. Then how in the world do you expect?
No, then you definitely misunderstood me. What I said is
that's how I'm understanding you.
Let me repeat it for you again. According to his worldview,
so his understanding,
he cannot interpret this conversation correctly.
So his understanding. So if he can't interpret the conversation,
but the Bible says that all men use the thinking of God, the morals of God, the logic of God, the reason of God, all of these divine principles that govern our thinking, even though they don't give him credit for it.
Can I speak again?
I want to make sure you're representing the conversation I just had rightly. You're not.
But if he cannot understand what you're saying...
He can understand it, but not because of his worldview.
Okay, if he can't understand the position you're coming from, we'll go that way, is that right?
Maybe you should repeat after me. Maybe you should repeat after me if you want to represent what I'm saying. He can't understand it according to his worldview.
Somebody accuses you of vicious circularity. What are they doing? See, and now we're back to the one-cop town, the person standing there in your uniform next to your cruiser. They're bringing a logical argument against you. They're accusing you of circularity. Who owns logic? Jesus Christ. They can't bring a logical argument against me. They say your argument is circular? What's wrong with that? Where do you get logic that forbids circularity in your worldview? In my opening statement, what I expose is that Matt cannot account for reason, whereas I can. He might disagree with how I account for reason, but clearly, of the two of us, Matt could not account for reason. He disagreed with how I account for it, fine. But he does not have a basis for his objection to how I account for reason. By his own admission, reason requires truth. And that's what I showed in my opening statement. Is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Yes. Yes, it is. I'm going to argue tonight that not only is it reasonable to believe that God exists, but that denying belief in God reduces one's worldview to absurdity. Well, why is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Quite simply, because it's true that he exists. Here's my argument. Premise 1, it's reasonable to believe that which is true. Premise 2, it's true that God exists. Conclusion, therefore, it's reasonable to believe that God exists.
My point to you, Si, is you intentionally go back to the Bible every time.
Of course.
But
that's my authority.
And okay,
you go to your reasoning every time.
I do go to reasoning every time.
That's
Thank
your
you.
authority.
Well, Matt says something